Hello, in today's video I'm going to share with you how to make a decorative towel using fabric appliques and fabric to create a border and a ruffle on your towel edge also. So I have in front of me here all my pieces. I've already cut everything out, but I'll go over exactly what I did here so that you can see. I'll share the cut file for doing this. Now this particular towel I picked up just at Walmart. It was like $1.49. I think it measured 16 inches across by, looks like about 26, 27 inches long. Now this one has a decorative stitch area here. So I want to make sure that I cover that when I attach my fabric to this edge of the towel, because this is the edge I'm going to attach to. Now there's a tag here on the back. So I just like to cut these off right away. First thing is right down to the seam here, get this out of the way. So I have a couple products here to talk a little bit about. The first one is Heat and Bond, which is what I use on the back of Appliqués. It's a two-sided adhesive, so you'll frequently hear me just refer to this as a two-sided adhesive, a more generic term than the brand name Heat and Bond. Now there's two different kinds of Heat and Bond you can buy. This one says light sewable, which is what I like to use. That's more of a temporary hold. You do have to sew this applique onto your project if you plan on washing it, because if you put this in the wash with using this product, it will just come unstuck. Unlike the Heat and Bond Ultra Hold, this one is a permanent adhesive and it is made not to be sewn. Matter of fact, you'll have a lot of difficulty if you can even sew a applique that has been used with this on as the double-sided adhesive. So I'm going to sew this because I just like the way they look better. So I'm going to use either this Heat and Bond Light or another product I really like, because I could buy this by the yard and it goes on sale a lot, is the Pellon 805, the Wonder Under. This is also a fusible, sewable, double-sided adhesive. So that's actually what I used today in this project. So in the file, you will find 3 PEEP appliques. You can cut these all out on the same fabric if you want. You can use 3 different fabrics. Really, the choice is yours. You can actually use any SVG silhouette style or not. You can use a layered one too if you want, image, and do this. So the first thing I did was I looked at my project and I saw the size that was required to cut out this image. So I cut that out for my fabric. Then I took that piece, I think this one I used like a 4 by 7 inch cut of fabric, and then I took it over and cut out in the Wonder Under, or the double-sided adhesive, a piece that was measured the same amount. And I used my iron, or you can use your mini easy press or a full-sized easy press. Just like this, I always keep this one, excuse me, the mini handy right by my sewing table and the mat so that I can use that while I'm sewing. So I adhered this, placed it, the sticky side, the non-papered side down against the wrong side of my fabric. Gave that a press, did it both from the back and the front, then let it cool, and then I peeled off the paper side. Then I put the fabric piece down on my mat. Now you can cut this with either a maker, which is what I used, and the rotary blade. I did it on a medium cotton setting, cut it perfectly fine, or you can cut it using the bonded fabric, and that is an option for the Explore machines. And just make sure you use a brand new needle. You don't have to buy the housing with the heated with the fabric bonded blade. It's just a standard blade. You just need to keep it only for fabric use. So I did that 3 times, 3 different fabric choices here. Then I also cut out the ruffle and the trim piece on my maker. So you can use the, if you have an Explorer, you can use the freezer paper hack, which I shared a video on how to do that. Or you can just cut this on a self-healing mat with a rotary cutter and not even have your machine cut this, because these are just straight 2 rectangle pieces of fabric. They measure, for the ruffle, it measures 4 3/4 inches by the 23 1/2 that'll fit on a long fabric mat. And this is the trim piece, and this piece measured 5 inches by 1 inch more than the width of my fabric. So I cut this 17 inches long. Again, you can just do those with your rotary cutter and a self-healing mat. You don't have to use your Cricut to do that. So, all right, so now we've got our pieces all ready. Everything's prepped. I also have a little trim here of just some inexpensive ribbon that I picked up at Michael's that I'm going to use to put on the top of my trim. You'll see that as we go through this project. So you're going to need a length that is, again, 17 inches, the same length as the trim piece. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to fold the ruffle piece in half lengthwise. So just bring your 2 raw edges together like this. I use pins, so I'm going to place a pin to hold this. Fold it in half, right sides together. Do this to both ends. Then we're just going to stitch this closed so that the raw edges, when we turn this right side out, will be turned in and they won't be visible in the project once it's finished. So again, just folding these in half, right sides together of the fabric. All right, so I took this to my machine now, and I'm going to sew 1/4 inch seam width here. That's the distance between my needle and the edge of my fabric. In my machine here, that's the edge of my zigzag presser foot. So just going to lock this in by sewing forward a few stitches, then backwards, removing the pins as I get to them because I do not want to sew over the pins, coming all the way to the edge, sewing off and locking that back in, stopping with my needle up, pulling this out and trimming my threads right back to my fabric, just like that. So I am gonna, to make this a smoother point corner, I'm gonna cut off at a 45-degree angle, a little nip here, not cutting my threads. Gonna do that on both sides, just like that, so that when I turn this to the right side out, that will form a nice, tight corner there. Let me get my point turner. That's what this gadget is. Works great. Just push it right in there to that edge to poke that out. Do the same thing on the other side. Going to take this to the iron then, my mini easy press that I have right next to my machine here on a mat. And I'm going to press this flat, lining up the top raw edge like this. And I'm going to give this a press all along this fold here. Be right back. Okay, so I've got this iron now so that it is the right side out. The fold edge here is iron nice and flat. Now I put this from edge to edge in half to mark the center. And I put a pin here where the center is so that when we go to put this on the towel, we can match it to the center of the towel. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to sew a basting stitch. So look at your machine, and whatever the longest stitch length is you can do on your machine, that's what you're going to set your machine for. So I'm sewing on a old Singer here. I did in my Elna. So I have an old Singer out that was actually my mother-in-law's. So this one is a 6. So that is 6 stitches per inch is what that means. So I do not back and forth to lock the seam in. You want the threads long and loose. So I'm just going to sew forward now, not locking it in, right on that 1/4 of an inch from the edge of the raw edges of the fabric here, coming to that center pin. Just going to remove this quickly so I can sew over this, and then I'm going to put it right back in because I need that as a place marker. I could have also used a fabric marking pen to mark that same area. So I'm going to sew all the way to the other end and just sew right off the edge there. Stop, bring my needle all the way up, put my presser foot up. Now this time when I go to trim my threads off, I'm going to leave a long tail because I need that in order to tighten up these stitches. So there we go. So that is all sewn now with a long, loose stitch. So we're going to use that to gather up this fabric. And the way you do that is you come here to the edge and you find your threads. And I am just going to use my seam ripper just to separate these 2 threads from the front and the back. And I'm going to take the front one. Doesn't matter whether you're pulling from the front or the back, you just have to do the same on both edges. So I'm going to slowly start pulling this, holding my fabric, and you can see how it's bunching up the fabric. That's what you want to happen. And then just take your finger and slowly work that bunch down. Now you want to be careful that you don't pull too hard and snap this thread, because you want this thread to stay intact and the whole length, because that's what forms the gathers here. And this is how you form a ruffle or a gather with your fabric. Now I chose to do this by folding my fabric doubled in half like it is, so it'll look the same on both sides. I just like it better for the towel. Now my bottom edge of my towel here that we looked at earlier measured 16 inches, so halfway would be 8 inches. So I'm just going to give this a quick look to see how much I need to gather. Still a little bit more. I'm looking from that pin to the edge, and then once I get that so that it measures 8 inches in length gathered up, I'm putting a pin at the edge. Now I'm going to take my thread here and I'm just going to do a figure 8 over the tip and the end of this just a few times to hold my thread there nice and secure, so this won't pull out and loosen up my gathers. Now I'm just going to, using my fingers, adjust this down so that my gathers are more evenly spaced over this 8-inch section. And I'm going to repeat this on the other side. So I'll be back once I get this done on the other edge. All right, so I have this now all gathered down so that the total length is 16 inches, which is the width of my towel. All right, so here's the towel and the edge that I'm going to apply my ruffle and trim to. The distance between this embroidered section here that I want to cover to the bottom edge is 5 inches total. So I've calculated my pieces of fabric so that I can cover this, because I don't want this border trim here to show. So I've marked my seam guide to 4 1/4 inches. So that's the measurement down that I'm going to use to place my gathered fabric here. See, sorry I can't get a really good angle of this with my camera set up. So I've got it at the edge that I want. I'm on top of my printed trim here and coming down towards the bottom. So the guide is set at the 4 1/4 inch. So that's where I'm going to put this top edge of my ruffle at, 4 1/4 inches down from that mark. So I'm going to start at the side over here. And I'm going to come down the, excuse me, I can't see very well. I'm sorry about this silly camera here and my setup. So I'm measuring down 4 1/4 inches. So I'm going to put this raw edge right here at the 4 1/4 inches. And I'm lining this up with the edge. And I'm just going to put a pin in here to hold this now. And then I'm going to slowly work all along this edge here till I get this whole ruffle pinned in. And I'll be back once I've got that all pinned in and show you what that looks like. All right, so I pinned my ruffle to my edge here. I'm working on the right side of my towel also, just so you know that. And I didn't share this earlier, but I found the center of the towel between the right and the left sides and put a pin here. This is the pin I used to mark the center of my ruffle. So I matched this up as I pinned in this ruffle along the bottom. So the next step is I'm going to take my trim piece. That's just the flat rectangular fabric that we cut out that measured 5 inches tall by the width of this towel plus a an inch. So I am going to lay this right side down right along that raw edge there where the ruffle was. And I just eyeballed it so that the edge here overhangs. Sorry, I keep evenly on both sides, and that's about a 1/2 inch overhang. And again, I'm just now going to come along and pin this through all the layers the whole way. All right, so I have this now pinned on top, right side down onto my ruffle. You can see the ruffles underneath here, matching this top raw edge. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this to the machine and I'm just going to sew, starting at this end here. I'm going to lock it in place, my stitches, and just sew 1/4 inch down from the raw edge through all the layers, through the towel, through the ruffle, and through this trim piece. Okay, so I stitched that all the way down, the whole length. So now you can see when you fold this up towards the top of the towel, this trim piece of fabric is going to come up high enough now to cover that section of the towel here where it's got that embroidered stitch that I don't want to show. So that's the reason this trim piece is so tall. But you could actually do this at a shorter length if you don't have that on your towel. Now, if you look down here where the gathering lines are for the ruffle, sometimes you can see your stitches there. See where it shows right there? So what you're going to do for that is you're going to come back to those 2 pieces of thread that you kept at the end on both sides and just start giving this a pull. I was going to say you're going to probably need to use your seam ripper here to grab some of this thread out, just to pick all this out because you don't want the stitching showing. If I had sewn my seam to join the trim over this to a larger seam allowance than the 1/4 of an inch, this would have hidden this thread and then you didn't have to worry about it. But I wanted to keep everything standard at a 1/4 of an inch. It also helps sometimes if you use a contrasting thread when you sew in your gathering stitches. It'll show up easier and be easier to find to remove it. Just a little tip. Anyway, I'm going to pull all this thread out. All right, so I pulled out all that basting thread that was showing. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to my mini easy press iron, and on these edges now that overlapped by about 1/2 an inch, I'm going to take this fabric and I am going to press it towards the wrong side just like that, so that when this is folded up, you will get a nice edge here where it meets the towel. You won't have a raw edge exposed there. It'll be tucked under. So I'm going to go ahead and press that, get this all nice and flat lined up the way we want it to be. Be right back. Okay, so I ironed my trim up this direction towards where that embroidered pattern on the fabric, on the towel was that I wanted to cover up. I turned my edges in, iron this flat. So now the next step is to put the trim on. So again, I'm going to cut my trim to the 1 inch of, the length of the width of my towel plus 1 inch. So that's 17 inches in my case. And I'm going to cut my little ribbon. Here's the ribbon I'm going to use. And again, I'm just going to tuck under the edge about 1/2 an inch on one side to get started. So I have my edge tucked under, just like that. Here's the back side. You can see I have a pin in there to hold that. Now I'm going to come up here to the top raw edge of my trim, and I'm going to lay this down, and I'm going to align my edge here. And then I'm just going to pin this in place, and I am putting this halfway over. You can see here if I fold this back that I am putting it halfway over the raw edge, so that when I sew this with the double stitch, I'm going to catch my trim on one of the stitch lines, and on the other one it'll be the other edge of the trim and the towel catching. So I'm just going to pin this all down till I get to the other edge. Then once I get to this other edge, I'm going to I'm going to turn under the edge again, so that I don't have a raw edge of my trim showing. All right, so I have this now pinned with the two edges, tucked under. And I'm covering up the meeting point between the trim and the towel. It's going right down the middle. So now I'm going to sew first down one side all the way to the end, go up the side, and then back down on the opposite side here to attach this. So again, I'm going to lock this in, and I'm going to remove my pins as I get to them, and I'm just sewing as close as I can to the edge of my trim here. So I'll be back when I sew the edge I'm sewing towards to show you how to do that. All right, so I've come up to my edge here now. I'm going to stop with my needle down, lift up my presser foot, just rotate this around, put my presser foot down again. Now I'm going to sew to the other edge of my trim here. Again, stopping with my needle down, lifting my presser foot, and rotating my fabric till I get in the direction I want to sew, putting the presser foot down and sewing off in that direction. All right, so I'm back at my other end. Again, I'm going to stop with the needle down. I'm going to lift my presser foot. Now this time when I sew, I'm going to sew all the way down to here. I'm going to sew along this bottom here where they meet. And I'll show you here. Let me just do this side. So now I'm sewing all the way down because we need to close this area up here too. And I'm coming now towards where my ruffle met. And I'm going to stop about 1/4 of an inch before that seam. Needle down, presser foot up, rotate the fabric, turn my direction, and now I'm going to sew down this way here. This is just a decorative stitch at this point along here. It's not really needed, but it helps just to keep it all flat. Because when you when you wash this, you know, things change the way they look. So this helps just hold it in the direction you want things to go. So again, I'm coming down here close to this edge, stopping with my needle down, rotating around. Now to sew up this edge till I come up to my trim here. And then I'll just do a lock back and forth stitch to lock this in place. And we are done with this part of the towel. So I'm up here just going to back stitch and lock this in. All right, stop with my needle up and trim off my threads back to my project here. And I'm going to trim up the thread on the other edge. And now the ruffle and the trim and the ribbon accent piece are all attached to your towel. You can actually stop at this point. This makes a cute towel just as it is. It doesn't really need the appliques added, but they add more interest, so I'm going to do that part next. So you can see here now that this is all sewn and attached to the towel. And that looks really cute, I think. So now I'm going to put my appliques on, the 3 peep bunnies that I made. So you can do this in any order that you want them placed on your towel here. Let me see if I can get this to show better. Okay. So I'm going to put my lighter color in the middle. And then I'm going to put my 2 darker bunnies to the side. Now I'm going to take this over to a work area where I can see this better. And I'm going to space all this out to distances that I like, that look good to me visually. But I'm going to put them all on the same plane here. So they're all going to be the same distance up from my trim. In this case, I'm thinking I'm going to put them about 1.5 inches up. So I'll be back once I get them all nicely spaced on here. Okay, so I got my bunnies spaced now the way that I like them. I did them 1.5 inches up from the trim here. And this one, the center was at 4.5 from the edge. This one's at 8. And then this one here I did at 11.5 inches from the left edge over. So I've got these pinned in place, so I'm just going to take them right over to my mini easy press, and I'm going to give these guys a press so that they stay in place, and I'll be back to share with you how I stitch around them now for a decorative stitch and also to anchor them to the towel. Okay, so I've got my little peeps pressed and ironed so they're sticking to the towel now. If I had used like a double-sided adhesive that has a harder hold and non-sew, we'd be done now. That'd be it. Don't have to do anything else. But because I used the sewable ones now, I need to do a stitch around the edge here to secure these to my towel. Now, you can use a zigzag stitch. The closer you put the stitch length together. So in other words, the higher number on your machine generally, the tighter the stitching will be. And that could look even like a satin stitch, and like it would an embroidery machine would do. But I like to use a blanket stitch or a blind stitch when I do mine. Okay, so my little peeps are all attached, and I actually use 3 different stitches here. So you can kind of see the difference on a few of these stitches that maybe your machine offers. I say this blue guy, this is the one that you use for your blind hems. And that sews a straight stitch, then like a zigzag in. So I did that all around. This pink one, I use just a zigzag stitch on this. I didn't do this at my tightest stitch length. If I had tightened this up, it would have given you what looks like a satin stitch, like what an embroidery machine would do. But that's just a simple zigzag going around the edge. And then this last one that I use, this is called an over edge stitch for stretch. But it doesn't have to be just used for stretch. You kind of see what that guy looks like. Anyway, all 3 of them, actually, they all look fine, so it's up to you what stitch. Give a try on your machine. You probably have a lot more options than I do, and have fun with it. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. And one quick thing I want to mention before I go here is that I use this as a spring Easter theme, but you could do this in any type of fabric you want. You could use things that match your kitchen so that they're more everyday looks. Change this up for different holidays with different images that you use. I also have in the Fabric Fun group, I have 2 different, or actually 3 different patterns, I think, for a hanging towel that would have a top to this. I have one that's for Easter that's a rabbit that you can have a look at over in that group. As a member of Cricut Design Space, you just have to click on the link that's in the announcements to join the Fabric Fun group, answer the questions, and you're in. And I also have just a plain one that you can use so that it can be more general, or if you use a holiday type print fabric, that becomes a holiday print fabric. And the directions and everything to all these options are in the guide. The guide sections over there. We have a lot of fabric projects that you are more than happy to try. We're always available to answer questions, and hope you enjoyed this little tutorial.